The Brotherhood shall prevail.
Hello everyone! During the first war between the Horde and the Alliance, the Horde took Stormwind and they destroyed the city. Crown Prince Varian Wrynn managed to escape the city, and the Alliance of Lordaeron defeated the Horde and closed the Dark Portal behind them. They gave Varian his kingdom back, but the city lay in ruins, so they had to rebuild it. For this job, they recruited the Stonemasons Guild. This guild consisted of many different craftsmen from all over the kingdom who moved their families and lives just for this job. They chose Edwin Van Cleef as their leader, and the amount of members has been described as a small army. This small army did a fantastic job. Not only did they rebuild Stormwind, they made it better than before, even including a section for the new Dwarven and Gnome allies. The Gnomes then constructed the gigantic underground tunnel connecting Ironforge to Stormwind to make sure that their alliance stayed strong and that they could move troops and resources faster. Once the job was done, the Stonemasons wanted to be paid for their work, so they asked for their money. This project took several years, and by this time Varian had married Tiffin, she had given birth to Anduin, and the Black Dragon Onyxia had infiltrated Stormwind. Different sources claim different things about the following events. One side says that the nobles expected the Stonemasons to do the work for free as a service to their kingdom. Other sources say that the nobles simply didn't have the money that was promised to the Stonemasons. During Classic World of Warcraft, you had a questline that involved investigating the Defias Brotherhood. Defias Shaw, leader of the SI7, reports that the nobles had used up their funds by expanding their military presence throughout Elwyn and Stranglethorn. So they simply didn't have the money to pay the Stonemasons anymore. What we also know is that Onyxia had manipulated events, convinced the nobles that the Stonemasons were asking for too much money. Tiffin, on the other hand, was a supporter of the Stonemasons, and she urged Varian to pay them what they owed. Varian did his very best to convince the other nobles, but Onyxia, she had her claws deep within the council, and his words fell on deaf ears. The nobles didn't pay the Stonemasons what was promised, and naturally Edwin Van Cleef spoke out against this. In response to this, the nobles ordered the Stonemasons Guild to disband, which was a huge mistake. The Stonemasons by that time figured that if Stormwind wasn't going to pay, then they would get their payment some other way. Van Cleef led a riot through the street while the rest of his guild fled the city and moved to Westfall. During this riot, a single rock took the life of Varian's wife Tiffin and sent Varian in a deep depression. Now the Stonemasons were no longer under contract by Stormwind, and they started to call themselves the Defias Brotherhood. No longer a guild of just builders. Now any who were down on their luck, thieves, criminals, any who stood against the House of Stormwind were welcome within the Brotherhood. Van Cleef was not just any ordinary builder. In his youth, he was trained by Defias Shaw himself, with the idea of Van Cleef possibly joining the SI7. This made him a very skilled and very dangerous man, and on top of that, he had connections. Connections built up in his lifetime as Stonemason, and the Defias Brotherhood grew rapidly. They recruited mercenaries like ogres, hired crafty goblins with their machinery. They had gnolls and kobolds in their ranks, and they took over several locations within the kingdom. They had the mines in Elwyn, had contacts within the House of Nobles of Stormwind, they had members in Duskwood, in Stranglethorn, but their main base of operations was within Westfall. Not only did they take the mines in that area, they also attacked the farmers of Westfall, burning down their crops and salting the land, hurting Stormwind even more. Over the years, the Defias Brotherhood grew into the hundreds, and no road was safe from their bandits. Stormwind didn't just sit on its hands while all of this was going on. They tried to take action against the Brotherhood, but their armies were already spread thin, so the people of Westfall had to take it upon themselves to take action. And they formed the People's Militia, a group of citizens who had enough, who realized that Stormwind could never help them, and they took it upon themselves to keep their land safe from the threats of the Defias Brotherhood. Their leader was named Grey and Stoutmantle, paladin and soldier of the Alliance during Warcraft 3.
Fools! Our cause is righteous.
Stoutmantle and his militia recruited heroes from the Alliance not only to kill the Defias, but also to find out where they were, who they were, and what they were up to. This involved a huge questline spreading over 3 zones, and eventually you would find out about the history of the Stonemasons and Edwin Van Cleef himself. The Defias wasn't just about robbing people, that was a means to an end. Their bigger plan was to take revenge on Stormwind by building a gigantic juggernaut ship. This ship was crafted after the designs of the Horde and they wanted to attack Stormwind from the sea. I couldn't find out exactly why this ship was such a huge threat. Apparently one single ship could deal massive damage to Stormwind, so let's just go with it. By the time that we find out about all of this, the construction of the ship was nearly complete, so something had to be done and it had to be done fast. The heroes made their way through the dead mines, killed several mercenaries along the way until they reached the man who was leading it all. From the shadows he appeared together with his Defias blackguards.
Lapdogs, all of you.
The heroes prevailed and they took down the man behind the Defias Brotherhood. Not only did they kill him, they also decapitated him to take his head with them to prove that he was really dead. The death of Van Cleef did not mean the end of the Defias Brotherhood, since Onyxia wasn't quite done with them yet. As I mentioned earlier, Onyxia had infiltrated Stormwind and she did this under the disguise of Lady Prestor. When Tiffin died, Varian fell into a deep depression and he became very vulnerable to Onyxia's magic. It looked like she had complete control over him, but what she didn't count on was Anduin. The love for his son gave the king the strength to break free from her control, so she had to come up with a new plan. She hired the Defias Brotherhood to kidnap the king as he went on a secret diplomatic mission to Fenimore. The Defias Brotherhood managed to capture the king, they brought him to Onyxia and she split Varian in two. One strong-willed Varian which she would kill, and one weak-willed Varian which she would use as a puppet to rule the kingdom from behind the curtains. Her plan was successful until the Naga attacked. The two Variants escaped and the strong-willed Varian jumped into the ocean while the weak-willed Varian was captured by the Naga and would later be ransomed back to Stormwind. The rest of the story is more about Varian, but the point is that the Defias Brotherhood is still alive and kicking. Chopping off one head of the beast did not kill their organization, and unknown to everyone was that Van Cleef was not alone on the ship. He had a daughter, namely Vanessa Van Cleef, and Vanessa saw how 5 so-called heroes murdered her own father and chopped off his head right in front of her own eyes. After these horrific events, she made her way out of the dead mines all the way to the Seldean's farm. Farmer Seldean and his wife Selma were very kind people and they took care of Vanessa when she walked into their home and collapsed on the floor. Vanessa lied to them and told them that she couldn't remember who she was or where she came from, so they named her Hope. But in truth, Vanessa started to plan her revenge against those who took her father away from her. Time passed and the Lich King started his war against the world. The People's Militia thought that the threat of the Defias Brotherhood was over, so they renamed themselves the Westfall Brigade and they held the alliance in Northrend. Once the war was over, they returned home and saw that things had not improved. Anyone who was unfortunate enough to not have a job in the army became very poor. The land was riddled with beggars and thieves, and on top of that, Deathwing broke free and the cataclysm shook the world. This was the opportunity Vanessa had been waiting for and she made her move. She had Gnolls attack Sentinel Hill to keep the militia busy while she recruited new members. Amongst them were Glubak, a powerful ogre mage, Helix Gearbreaker, a goblin who used to work for the Horde, and Admiral Ripsnarl. Ripsnarl used to be a human named James Harrington, but he somehow became a worgen and murdered his own daughter, son and wife. He was recruited to command the Juggernaut when it was ready to move out and attack the city of Stormwind. All of this story is not directly revealed when you reach Westfall. It all begins with the murder of poor old Blanchy and the farmer's Furbrow. This leads into a huge investigation, which reveals that it was Vanessa who put out the hit on the farmers and that she's been busy resurrecting the Defias Brotherhood. She holds a speech in the middle of Moonbrook telling the people that today is the day they'll make a stand. Gather, brothers and sisters, come all and listen. We are abandoned, the orphaned children of Stormwind. Our king sits atop his throne made of gold and shrugs at our plight. Meanwhile, our children die of starvation on these very streets. His war, not ours, cost us our livelihood. We paid for the Alliance victories with our blood and the blood of our loved ones. The time has come, brothers and sisters, to stop this injustice. The government of Stormwind, of the Alliance, must be made accountable for what it has done to us. Today, we are reborn. Today, we take a stand as men and women, not nameless, faceless numbers. A vision within the Dead Mines shows you that Vanessa is Van Cleef's daughter, and you quickly return to Sentinel Hill to report the news. You bastards will burn for what you did. Out of the tower, Hope Seldine moves to the group gathered. In her disguise, she was able to overhear everything that the militia did, and as promised, the day of reckoning had come. Vanessa revealed herself, and out of the shadows the Defias Brotherhood struck, freeing Captain Ripsnarl and burning Sentinel Hill to the ground. Before Vanessa left, they asked her, why? Why did the Fur Brawls have to die? To which Vanessa explains that they had recognized her for who she really was. She couldn't take the chance of being exposed, so the farmers had to die, although she took no pleasure out of their deaths. She decides to spare your life, since you've helped her with her cause, even if you didn't know it yourself. With Sentinel Hill burning, you're sent to Stormwind to warn the king about what had happened. In response, Varian promises to send more troops to Westfall to reclaim the hill. This took care of the immediate threat, but we still had to worry about the Defias within the dead mines. We got the task of clearing out the dead mines once again, and along the way we took out Vanessa's henchmen. At low level, Captain Cookie will come out and act as a decoy, but at level 85 we faced off against the real kingpin of the Defias Brotherhood.
I've been waiting a long time for this, you know. Biding my time, building my forces, studying the minds of my enemies. I was never very good at hand-to-hand combat, you know. Not like my father. But I always excelled at poisons. Especially venoms that affect the mind. Poor Glubtalk. When his powers manifested, his own ogre mound was the first to burn. Deep within his soul, the one thing he feared most of all was himself. Most rogues prefer to cloak themselves in the shadows, but not Helix. You never know what skitters in the darkness. Can you imagine the life of a machine? A simple spark can mean the difference between life and death. Ripsnarl wasn't always a bloodthirsty savage. Once, he even had a family. He was called James Harrington, a tragedy in 3 parts.
After fighting through the fear, we end up in hand-to-hand combat with Vanessa Van Cleef.
I will not share my father's fate. Your tale ends here.
She wasn't as trained as her father was, but she was smart and she came prepared. She rigged the ship with several explosions, which took out many of the first-time adventurers who didn't know about the ropes.
Fools! This entire ship is rigged with explosives! Enjoy your fiery deaths!
In her final moments, with death staring her in the face, she refuses to give up and go down the same way her father went.
I will not give you the pleasure! If I'm going to die, I'm taking you all with me. My fate is my own!
In a desperate last attempt of murdering the heroes who tried to stop her, Vanessa Van Cleef took her own life by blowing herself up. Which brings us to the end of the story of the Defias Brotherhood, at least for this moment. As long as Stormwind can't take care of its own citizens, the Defias will never truly be gone. This is the first time that I actually feel sympathy for an organization that's supposed to be bad. In reality, they were just pawns used by Onyxia. They were the victims of the story. The House of Nobles were the ones who refused to pay them. And sure, their actions were not good or right, but revenge is a very powerful motivation. Who knows what might have happened to the Van Cleefs if they were just paid for the work that they had done. And there's still one thing left unanswered. Who is Vanessa's mother? Will she possibly take up the mantle of Kingpin one day? Are there more children that we didn't know about? Who can say, but for the moment the dead mines are clear again. And hopefully Stormwind will use this time to rebuild Westfall, bring food, build homes for all those who lost their family in the name of Stormwind. That's the end of my video. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Subscribe if you like my videos, and until next time guys, see ya!